Their argument about OpenRAN is, make a big deal about OpenRAN, and then you sort of get to the nitty gritty, and they go, well, we don't think it's going to be good enough until the mid 2020s for urban deployment, which is quite a long time. Away, yeah. In the interim period, obviously, what are they going to do? I mean, they're building out their 5G. Are they just going to stop building out 5G and go, well, we'll wait, actually, and not build out our 5G network because we're waiting for OpenRAN? By the time they get to 2025, we'll have ubiquitous 5G coverage, and it'll be a case of looking at new 5G use cases then and extending it into the enterprise sector and all that stuff. And you're telling me they're going to come along and rip out that equipment they've put in place and introduce OpenRAN vendors just because they want diversity, and they're going to write off all this equipment that they built out up and down the country at high cost. Rubbish.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. This is my second studio session today. This is why I'm not wearing a metal t-shirt for once, because I just recorded the video for the Global Telecoms Awards.
You don't want a metal t-shirt?
What are you talking about? It's live.
Is it? No. I was going to say, have I screwed up the fourth wall? Well, anyway, anyone who watches both this podcast and those awards, sorry for screwing up the magic.
But do tune in next week.
But do tune in. That's going to be Tuesday at 4 o'clock.
You could have changed t-shirts between them. You could have slipped into something more comfortable.
More metal-y.
Like a metal t-shirt.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a bit disrespectful to all the awards people for me to wear some sort of Slayer t-shirt with some salivating demon on it or something like that.
Fuck coronavirus.
For my fuck coronavirus t-shirt. Can you imagine that? All the people going, Scott, our sponsors are not happy.
I would have had to blur the whole thing.
Yeah, well, quite.
Taking ages.
But that was good, and it was really exciting for me because we normally, if we do the awards thing as we normally do in a big room where I'm wearing like a dinner jacket, where I'm having to shoehorn myself into a dinner jacket I bought about 20 years ago. I sort of look like some kind of out of shape bouncer when I'm doing those. Then we get like a comedian up, like in the past we've had like Paddy Keelty and Miles Jupp and Russell Kane and so on. And Jeff Norcott, a comedian who I know, I follow his podcast, was going to be at this year, but then we realised that for a variety of reasons we couldn't do the live event.
Yeah. And
Jeff we had a bit of to and fro, and in the end we decided to just get him here, sat where you are now. You're sitting where prior to this a celebrity was sat.
Wow, I feel honoured. It's still slightly warm even from Jeff Norcott's arse.
See if I can extract that clip and send it to him now that we're best mates. And so that was all fun, and that was a good couple of hours. He was really generous with his time, and so Pierre's got to sort of cut our sort of inane waffle down into something digestible. So this is my second sesh. Wow. But I didn't have a beer because the Norcott one kicked off at 10 a.m. and I was pushing it a bit even for me, unless I'm flying, of course.
Could have had a Bloody Mary.
Could have had a Bloody Mary, that's it.
A mimosa?
Or just pretended I was at an airport, at which case you can get off your tits any time.
Who says that?
This is like an unwritten rule.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sure.
It's like the English Constitution.
Go to an airport at 9 o'clock and walk past the pub and just see the amount of blokes.
Yeah, but if you're jet lagged,
with their pint. Yeah. I've got a pint.
And then they're just going to like Amsterdam, which is 45 minutes away.
Yeah, exactly. And then the cabin staff walk past them and go, oh God, this is going to be a fun flight.
That's what stag do's normally claps as they depart the plane, don't they? Because they've had so much at the airport and on the flight.
Yeah.
They get off and then that's it. That's the end of the stag do.
Actually, I can definitely say, and I went long haul on a stag do once to Vegas.
Ooh.
And we got upgraded. So we were on a long haul flight, I think maybe it was Virgin, and we were at that bit at the front, you know, where James Bond hangs out at the little shoehorn bar at the front.
I've never been near one of those before on a flight.
Yeah, so we got upgraded and we were on a stag do, so we were just like, bring it on. The only problem is, by the time you getting wrecked on a plane really messes with you, because you've got the jet lag, you've got the dehydration, and none of us could get back on form for like 2 or 3 days when we were in Vegas.
Which is the amount of time you were there.
We were so done in by getting mashed on the plane.
So the plane was the highlight of the stag do.
Well, it was just odd. I don't necessarily recommend it.
No.
Having said that, if I was in the same position again, like 25 years later, I probably would do that again.
You'd do it, wouldn't you?
Anyway, so that was all jolly good fun. Not that you'll listen to this, Jeff, but thank you very much for that. And everyone check it out next Tuesday when it comes out. Other than that, not much to report. We haven't got any bribe of the week. We haven't been taken out to lunch, although we are going out to lunch. We're recording this on Thursday. We are going out to lunch with Ericsson tomorrow, who, funnily enough, we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So that could be awkward,
Ericsson
couldn't it?
UK.
If we really slag them off, and then we're out with them tomorrow, and we're all going, yeah, we're all best mates, and then on Monday they're like, Scott, what's going on?
Well, it's Ericsson UK though, isn't it? Tomorrow,
Ericsson
and this
UK.
is more of a group.
Anyway,
thing,
I don't plan to slag them off any more than we slag off anyone normally. I don't have a special reason to be unpleasant to Ericsson. You'll be relieved to hear. So that's it. I'll just crack on with it, given that we got to get wrapped up within about an hour or so. So this week, I think we're going to have to just go ORAN again, OpenRAN again.
Well, there is a lot going on.
Yeah. You know, like last week where I was all self-conscious about doubling down on fibre, such that we rebranded it broadband. I can't even think of a way of rebranding OpenRAN, except for OpenRAN or ORAN.
ORAN protectionism.
ORAN protectionism, yeah. ORAN begging to governments.
I think this is more about the political side of ORAN than the technology
We
side.
could end up captioning it political ORAN, well, whatever. It doesn't matter. I think our audience can handle us talking about the relevant subject twice. So we've got a few stories about that. One that I'm going to sort of largely hand over to Ian on because it's breaking today. He's written it up. I was too busy hobnobbing with celebs to write it up. I've got better things to do than telecoms now, Ian. I'm going to be opening for Jeff on the next leg of his tour. Can you imagine? Telecoms. So we're going to talk about that. That's going to lead us into an Ericsson segment where it's not directly OpenRAN, but they keep coming out with announcements that are sort of OpenRAN adjacent. They seem, or at least that's how they'd have us view them from their literature.
I think it's more about RAN automation.
Okay, yeah, because then there's also to do with this thing, the RIC. What does that stand for again?
RAN Intelligent Controller.
There we go. So we're going to sort of get into the weeds with a sort of more OSS type of thing there, aren't we?
Yeah.
And then we're going to lighten it up a little bit at the end. We're going to talk about Sainsbury's just opened up one of those shops where you just don't have to interact with anyone. You just go in, grab some stuff and leg it, and it just works out what you got and bills you for it. And so we're just going to talk about that paradigm. There's some...
Sounds dangerous.
It does a bit. Although, well, no, I'll keep my powder dry on that. Because I think in some ways it's less dangerous than what they're doing now. But, yeah, so that's what we'll do. So,
Never mind.
Oh, yeah, nice one, Pierre. And getting all freestyly.
Forgot last week.
Yeah. Did I forget last week? Oh, bad me. Okay, and just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. Cool. Right, so this story I just alluded to in the intro. Ian, why don't I just hand it straight over to you? What is going on in Europe with OpenRAN?
Well, I don't know if you can cast your mind back to February time, I think, this year. Can you? Am I not close enough to the thing? A little like you were gesticulating at me, but they must have imagined.
He does that sometimes. I had that on the previous recording. he was just feeling a sore wrist, and I thought he was just saying you're a wanker or something.
So sensitive.
Well,
I just moved my mic.
Okay.
I just saw out the corner of my eye and I thought, he's telling me that I need to move the thing closer, but apparently not.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So if you cast your mind back to sort of February this year, and the big European operators that are really enthusiastic about OpenRAN, so it's Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, Telefonica, Orange, and then Telecom Italia sort of joined a bit later. Yeah. They were fashionably late, as the Italians often are to these things.
Not as fashionably late as BT, which we covered.
Well, BT's not even involved.
Yeah.
Now, they come into this, I think, because actually a lot of the stuff that we were told last week, I think, is almost a counter to what they were saying today. But anyway, earlier this year, they basically got together and wrote this document and sent it off to the Europeans, saying, please, sir, can we have some money for OpenRAN, basically. It's kind of a plea.
And this is just came out today, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. I mean, clearly, what's happened is the Europeans haven't done anything or not done enough.
And you're saying by Europeans, you mean the EU? Yeah.
European. I mean, it's directed at the top.
The EU, the regulators, the national governments.
Yeah, I mean, there's not any one specific one called out, and the paper today is just very much about the EU not really doing enough.
Yeah. So I haven't written it up, but I've got the press release here, and it's headed "Europe urged to act now to build OpenRAN ecosystem."
Yeah, and it's it's 10 months on since the original one, and the tone is, I would say, slightly more desperate and hysterical than it was last time round.
So they're basically going, we were banging on about this in February and you've done fuck all.
Yeah, and the underlying message is that unless there's government action and some kind of support from, governments in terms of funding and sort of helping to support test beds and all this sort of stuff, then Europe's going to fall behind other parts of the world like Asia and, parts of Asia and the US that are heavily invested in OpenRAN. And that it'll all be a calamity, and it's another reason to sort of have a gripe about Europe, basically.
And that is often how I've noticed when telcos, individuals or groups of them in this case, go cap in hand to the state to ask for taxpayer money, they always frame it in this sort of geopolitical way.
Yeah.
Like hand over some money or the country's in trouble.
Exactly, yeah.
And they're saying hand over some money or the whole block's in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all about money, but funding is mentioned. I mean, it's almost more explicit than it is last time because they've called out examples of, I think there's a $1.5 billion fund, isn't there, or something in the US, and some of that's going into OpenRAN. I mean, the US has been quite keen on sort of actually putting...
And they'd be more overt about it being a strategic priority, haven't they?
Exactly, and I think these European operators are saying that it isn't a strategic priority in Europe, and it should be. And there's a list of recommendations, and one of them very explicitly says funding and tax breaks for they're not just talking about startups here, by the way. They also mention themselves, that we should be able to sort of benefit from funding and tax breaks for OpenRAN.
Yeah.
And I took a very sort of negative tone in the thing I wrote today, as I did when it first came out, actually back in February. I just don't. I mean, I think the point remains the broad point remains that I made in February, which is why. I mean, let's be honest. OpenRAN is a pretty niche technology outside the industry. I know we talk about it a lot, and from a B2B perspective, it's a big topic at the moment. But it's this isn't something. If you went to talk to European officialdom or consumers or general IT people, even who aren't sort of in telecom, they possibly wouldn't even know what it is. Yeah. It's a subset. It's a technology concept. It's a technology concept that is of interest to chief technology officers for various reasons. And these are not badly off companies that we're talking about here. We've just gone through a pandemic when a lot of the hospitality industry, a lot of other businesses have really struggled. And they're all on the lookout for some kind of handout at the moment. And arguably, I mean, airlines, I think, and other sectors have a much stronger case for government support at the moment, considering that they weren't even allowed to operate because of government restrictions. The telecom sector actually did pretty well compared to most others. I mean, I checked the numbers. I just went through the sort of the bottom line for these 5 companies, and it comes to, if you put it into dollars, it comes to about $22 billion in net profit last year. Those 5.
The 5 named in here.
The 5 named in here. They're currently
DT, Orange, TIM, Telefonica, and Vodafone.
Yeah, they're highly profitable organisations. Their market cap.
You wouldn't think it the way they go on about what a tough life they have.
No, and the market cap at the moment is about $200 billion collectively. I mean, all right, they're not Google, they're not Alphabet, but they're big. They're big organisations.
Got to put in perspective that they're all 5 of them market cap isn't as big as US tech giants.
Yeah,
scary. Isn't
well,
it?
exactly. I know that's a different matter, but that goes for a lot of other companies, doesn't it? There's a massive mismatch between US tech and other organisations, but they're not unprofitable. The point is they're not unprofitable. They've had a pretty good pandemic compared to most other organisations. They've actually been in the right industry for a pandemic that drives people into their homes and forces them to use the internet a lot. And they're asking for government support for this small technology that they're interested in using in their networks. And then, for me, the immediate question is, well, why don't you do it yourselves? And none of them is doing it themselves. This is the stupid thing. The only one of those 5 that has actually made any kind of serious commitment to OpenRAN is Vodafone, which is using it across 2,500 sites in the UK. And even that is a fairly small percentage of the total number of sites that Vodafone has in the UK. I think it's about 19,000. And they're doing it because they've been told that they have to replace Huawei at those sites. But none of the others have made any kind of serious commercial commitment to this technology and said that we'll use it at a certain number of sites. They've given no indications of what, even though they've been asked repeatedly about where and when they plan to deploy it and how many sites it could be used at. They've not come out with any firm commitments.
They open up a centre every now and then. Like
they open
when
up a research centre and they do tiny little things. They make suggestions like, it might be used first in indoor facilities or on enterprise. Well, great, but that's not why isn't that something you can invest in yourself?
Yeah.
If that's what you're talking about?
That was always our question with the BT thing we spoke about last week. If it's worth it,
Yeah.
Then
if there's a market demand for it,
then do it. If it's not, then don't.
And this is the other thing that really annoys me. They talk about support for startups, right? And there are a few named in the report, actually. I mean, one of the big points they've got is that there's a big mismatch between the number of US companies and Asian companies that are involved in OpenRAN on the supplier side and the number that are involved on the European side. There's only a small number of these kind of startups. And they call out some of them. They go through different categories and they list some of these firms. One of the names is, interesting, a company called Amarisoft, which I've written about a few times. I've spoken to the CEO on the phone actually quite a lot over the last sort of few years, a guy called Frank Spinelli. And I remember going to an Orange press conference years ago, back in sort of 2016, 2017, when Amarisoft was there. And the whole reason for this press conference is that here are some network startups that we're going to support through funding, through they can come and use our facilities, through putting them in touch with the wider ecosystem and all this kind of stuff. Amarisoft is one of these firms. And I spoke to Frank Spinelli a few months ago, and he said that the whole thing from Orange had fizzled out.
Yeah,
that it had not had. I mean, he's very negative actually about the sort of relationship, that it hasn't really gone anywhere.
So they make a little song and dance to get you over to Paris, and then it all goes off the boil.
Well, it just hasn't. Obviously, it hasn't worked. And why hasn't it? I mean, look, Rakuten has even bought an OpenRAN player, hasn't it? Altiostar. There's nothing to prevent these European operators have big VC arms. Deutsche Telekom's got a big venture capital arm. I think Orange has got the same thing. I mean, the last time I checked, and I have to admit, I didn't check for this story I did today because I just didn't have time, but I do remember looking at it in February, and there weren't any OpenRAN companies at all listed. They do exist in Europe. They could provide more support to Amarisoft than they've done. They could get behind companies like Acceleran, which is another one. Why should taxpayer money, basically, is what we're talking about, go into propping up or supporting startups?
Well, exactly. So
when there's no direct consumer benefit, it's not going to advance 5G. It's not.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because I was just reading the press release, and bear in mind this is with fresh eyes because I haven't had time to think about this. The second paragraph of the press release goes this. It goes, open, intelligent, virtualized and fully interoperable RAN, brackets, enabling more effective and efficient mobile communications. Well, I mean, open, intelligent, virtualized and fully interoperable, maybe, but that's not necessarily synonymous with OpenRAN, is essential if Europe is to meet its target of 5G for all by 2030. Those seem like spurious claims to me.
The whole report's full of spurious claims, actually.
Right.
I mean, you could. I wrote a really long story. I just got carried away this morning when I was banging it out and wrote about 1,500 words. There's a lot of stuff I didn't even say on that.
Right.
Because the whole thing's full of. But they make this assumption that the market has decided that OpenRAN is going to succeed.
Well, and also that 5G is not going to work out the way we want it without it.
I mean, if anything, OpenRAN is a distraction. Europe could be criticised for, lagging Asia and America at the moment on 5G rollout and fibre rollout, for instance. But if they start thinking that OpenRAN is the way to correct that, it will be a massive mistake. I mean, the reason that Europe arguably has got this lag is to do with market structure. It's to do with things like consolidation, the number of players in each market, arguably, and a regulatory climate that's too friendly to consumers and not enough to investors. I mean, I go along with that to some extent. I mean, it's a tricky one, but it's to do with things like squabbles over spectrum. It's to do with planning permission. It's to do with not enough sites being rolled out to do mid-band coverage. You've talked about a lot of these things on the podcast before. That's the reason why there's South Korea's ahead on 5G, and so is China. That's nothing to do with OpenRAN. It's absolutely nothing to do with OpenRAN at all. That is utter bullshit, the claim that OpenRAN is essential to meet 5G targets by 2030.
No one, I mean, I've never heard anyone suggest that before.
No.
That's the first time I've heard it.
I find it quite odd, and I had to ask myself this when I was writing my piece. Why is it all of a sudden that, because the case for OpenRAN that's been made before has been that on the operator side, a lot of it's been about diversifying the supply chain, hasn't it? We want alternatives to Ericsson and Nokia, which are the two big European vendors that do traditional RAN equipment. And they're more worried now because they've seen Huawei being sort of phased out of some markets. I mean, that's a particular issue in the UK. It's one of the reasons OpenRAN is probably a bigger priority in the UK than it is in some other European countries. And there is kind of government action there to some extent, which was mentioned in the report. But it seems to have moved on from we don't just want alternatives, we want European alternatives. I mean, why are they so... I don't understand this desire to actually have this sort of European supplier ecosystem. I mean, have they sort of decided that they don't want to buy from...
That's what they're calling for. as well as handouts, they're calling for the sort of European establishment to invest in the whole ecosystem, including startups and all that.
It's mainly about startups. I mean, there is a mention of funding for operators as well, but the whole idea is that there isn't enough of a European supply chain on the OpenRAN side, and that if the market moves in that direction and Europe doesn't do something about it, it's going to be dominated by Asian and US firms.
So Altistar and Mavenir or whatever.
Altistar, Mavenir, I mean, even the chip companies, and Dell and Hewlett-Packard on the service side. I mean, you name public clouds. One of the problems for me is a lot of the things they bring up in the report to do with chips, for instance, or cloud, actually, are things that no amount of public sector funding for OpenRAN is going to change that. I mean, they talked about this issue of us not having foundries here and fabs, to make high-end chips, which is irrelevant when it comes to OpenRAN.
Well, we do have them here. They're just not owned by us.
Well, this is the thing. What's Europe's solution to that? To try and beef up Global Foundries, I don't think can really compete against companies like TSMC on the sort of high-end stuff.
No, fair enough.
But Europe realises that, and it's got this target, this 2030 target of like doubling semiconductor production from 10% of the world, of the world's capacity to 20% or whatever. But how's it doing that? It's doing that by going out and courting TSMC and Intel and asking them to come and build. Well, that's not going to create a European chip ecosystem, is it?
We've failed to produce a major. Let's call them designers, so we don't get bogged down in that semantical stuff from last week. We've failed to produce a major chip designer in Europe. Yeah. Obviously, we've got ARM, which is one further back in the design phase.
We've definitely failed to produce any foundries at the high end level.
Yeah. So that's not suddenly going to happen because the EU decides to chuck a few euros.
And similarly, this issue that the US has pumped more money in to OpenRAN, and therefore they've got the fact that the US has all these players that are queuing up to try and get into OpenRAN has absolutely nothing to do with US public sector support. Intel's the big player in chips in OpenRAN at the moment, as we've talked about a lot. That's got bugger all to do with US public sector support for this.
Right. But there has been public sector support, though, hasn't there?
But that's not the reason. That's not the reason Intel and Hewlett-Packard and Dell exist, is it? It's not the reason the big public clouds.
No, but there is. They might be looking enviously at the US in terms of certainly the public pronouncements that have come out from the likes of politicians, the FCC, that they're really behind it. What they've done more than just words, I don't know. But obviously, to your point is completely right. They've got the people producing the stuff that goes into the mix. Yeah. And where the government seems to be poking its nose in is to try and accelerate the process of those things all working nice together to make OpenRAN as a complete proposition a more viable thing.
I don't see anything that the US has done at a sort of public sector level having any relevance at all to what's happened in. I just think it's talk and words. Yeah. I mean, look, what are they trying to do? The reason the US politicians, who actually really don't know how the market works anyway, and this is one of the dangers of trying to get policymakers involved, they don't really understand things very well.
And they don't need to. They just need to score political points.
Yeah, it's point scoring. But the reason this has become an issue in the US, I'll tell you why, and not here, is because they're trying to have an alternative to Ericsson and Nokia. That's the whole thing that they want. Yes. That's why they see OpenRAN as their opportunity to try and produce a big kit
kind of reset the market in the US direction.
We've already got big kit vendors. We've got two of the big three that produce 5G equipment.
Yeah, and the only two that are allowed in much of the world at the moment.
So, I mean, if you were a European official looking at this and you did sort of understand how the market works to some extent, you might be looking at it with some confusion, thinking what's going on here.
But up in Sweden and Finland.
And the other thing that's worth noting is that, I mean, we're going to come on and talk about this, about how those two companies feel about OpenRAN. I think the argument that OpenRAN could threaten their position. I mean, that's clear that's always been the case, that OpenRAN could throw up new challenges. It's not something they're necessarily happy about, to see the network disaggregated and new players slot in and they lose a bit of business somewhere. But I think this argument that they're totally opposed to it and they don't do anything on OpenRAN and you can't really use them, it's very old now. And I mean, there's so many things happening that those two companies
I sort of, in my editorializing in the second segment, so I won't steal our thunder too much. I do talk about the need for them to at least appear to be not antagonistic towards it.
Well, I think it's even more than that. I mean, if you look at the ORAN Alliance, which is the big group behind OpenRAN specifications, mentioned a lot in this report. I mean, from what I have heard from sources that I can't name, Ericsson and Nokia are responsible for most of the specifications work that goes on in the ORAN Alliance.
Right, because they might, not surprisingly, because they know a lot about RAN.
Well, they own all the stuff that needs to be opened, if you like. They're the ones with the technology. You're not going to get it from Dell. You're not going to get it from Cisco, people who don't have anything to do with the radio access network. You're going to get it from those guys. So, they're prominent players. It just seems a bit. As I say, if I was a European official, I'd be looking at this thinking, well, what exactly are they?
I also might be noting the absence. I know they're not as big, but I noticed I'll note the absence of sort of Telia and Telenor in this consortium.
Well,
maybe they feel a little bit more ambiguous about it.
I think to Neil McRae's points, who I quoted a couple of times in the thing I wrote today, I think there are operators that obviously don't see things that. I mean, one thing we sat, and I think a lot of publications led with this as their headline. One thing that Neil McRae said when BT had their press event last week was one of the biggest myths is that OpenRAN will allow us to save money, cut costs. And again, you talk about spurious claims in the report. I mean, one of the things they say is, the use of standardized hardware and network automation will lower costs. They just say it as a fact. This is proven.
Yeah.
Neil McRae, who knows a thing or two about software, comes out and says, I know how to write open source code. I know how much it costs to buy Intel chips and other chips from other guys that are doing OpenRAN layer 1, stuff. And I think this whole thing about saving costs is rubbish, basically. He just didn't see that as a case for it at all. This issue of being less dependent on a few big players, I think, is another one that is, which I think is at the heart of this, isn't it, really? This idea that, you diversify the ecosystem, and clearly if you've got European options there as well as American and Asian ones, then it's better because there's just more to choose from. But it's far from clear that operators will build these complex multi-vendor networks. Neil McRae himself said, I probably just want to use the same number of suppliers that I've got today. Well, what are you going to do then? You're either going to give, the only way to do that actually with the sort of OpenRAN principles is to give one vendor control of a whole domain, yeah? In the way they do it today, they regionalise the network, don't they? So Nokia looks after one part and does everything there.
Yeah.
And Ericsson looks after another part and does everything there. If you're gonna stick with the same number of vendors more or less, you're going to have to give, let's say, one company control of the software that runs across the whole network, and then let's say you get your radios from someone like MTI in Taiwan. That's worse, yeah? That's more dependency because you're entirely dependent then on one software company. That's the only way to do that. And so maybe he's wrong and it does end up being very, very fragmented, yeah? And you've got lots of choice and diversity. Well, the trouble then is you don't have the economies of scale that they've got today. So either you're going to have prices going up, not coming down, or you'll have consolidation and you'll get companies being bought, in which case you won't end up with diversity.
Yeah, so
there's a huge amount of bullshit.
That this daydream about there being a sort of marketplace, and we used this sort of Apple versus Dell analogy for laptops last week when we were chatting about it. The idea that you're going to go in and you're going to cherry pick from like 10 to 50 different bits of components and software to make your perfect RAN. I mean, firstly, there's presumably an ideal combination anyway.
Yeah.
And secondly,
in which case new systems integrators will emerge that take charge of everything, and they'll be no different from Ericsson.
So then, instead of Ericsson, you've got Rakuten. Acme Systems Integrator.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you and I completely agree on that, and I don't think we even need to sort of go over it again because we made the point quite emphatically last week. So the interesting thing for me in the story is why do you think this group is persisting with this? Because they've got their own strategies, and they've got their own views on OpenRAN, and they will ultimately do what makes sense for them. Why do you think they're persisting in this sort of collective lobbying activity? Is it just for handouts primarily?
Well, I mean, it seems to be that. I mean, as I say, the whole sort of business about having a local supply chain to me is relatively. It's relatively new. I mean, as I say, the whole thing about OpenRAN from an operator perspective, or one of the things about it, is that you get more competition into the market. I'm not saying I believe in that, but that's how they justify calling for it. This business about we need European options and not just Asian and US ones is I don't know where that comes from, really. I mean, it's quite protectionist in itself, isn't it? That we're only going to buy from European companies. Well, I mean, they've been quite happy in the past to buy from Intel or Cisco or whoever it might be, or Juniper.
You can see why they take a protectionist angle if they're trying to get wedge out of the EU, because the EU, as I keep saying, is an inherently protectionist thing. It's just a protectionist block.
Yeah.
It obviously plays very nice within itself. But it's very protectionist against non-EU people, as we're discovering post-Brexit.
I just don't think they want to... the big thing for me is, if you care so much about OpenRAN, why aren't you doing more on it?
Yeah.
And this is the odd thing about it. They want the EU to come along and stump up a load of money for something, when the only one of them that's shown any commitment to it at all is Vodafone in the UK.
Yeah.
It's not even in Europe, actually. Strictly speaking.
You're talking about them actually sort of building it out in Wales and the West Country.
Wales and the West Country, 2,500 sites. There's nobody else that's done anything like that on the scale of, on the scale of Vodafone. There's nobody else that's announced that. It's all test beds, it's all trials, it's all chatting about indoor deployments and that kind of thing. And then if you talk to someone like Orange, their argument about OpenRAN is, make a big deal about OpenRAN, and then you sort of get to the nitty gritty, and they go, well, we don't think it's going to be good enough until the mid-2020s. For urban deployment, which is quite a long time. Away. Yeah. In the interim period, obviously, what are they going to do? I mean, they're building out their 5G. Are they just going to stop building out 5G and go, well, we'll wait actually and not build out our 5G network because we're waiting for OpenRAN? By the time they get to 2025, we'll have ubiquitous 5G coverage, and it'll be a case of looking at new 5G use cases then and extending it into the enterprise sector and all that stuff. And you're telling me they're going to come along and rip out that equipment they've put in place and introduce OpenRAN vendors just because they want diversity, and they're going to write off all this equipment that they've built out up and down the country at high cost? Rubbish.
So I completely agree.
Ian Morris calls.
And this is why I don't believe some of the forecasts in it. There's a company called Analysys Mason that has a forecast, a very spurious forecast of OpenRAN accounting for a fifth of all RAN spending by 2025, 2026. I mean, I cannot square that with a company like...
I mean, look, I was an analyst once, as were you, back in the day. What are the presuppositions to that forecast?
I don't know how they do it.
The problem with these things, and I'm going to come to a quote from them in a bit as well, because it seems to sum up what the angle of this thing is. So when you get reports that have been sponsored by people with commercial interests, you can't help but assume that the outcome of the report was predetermined going in.
Yeah.
If someone comes up to you, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, someone comes up to you in your Acme analyst firm, and I'm coincidentally named Acme vendor, and I come in and go, look, I got 50 grand, but I need a report that says people got to buy more of our shit.
Yeah.
And you go away and you go, well, of course, we've got to use our own methodology and be rigorous and all that sort of thing. But I tell you what, show us the briefcase full of cash and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, a couple of months later, a report comes out that says people need to buy more of Acme vendors' shit.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, no analyst firm is going to risk its reputation by completely fabricating stuff. But if you're doing forecasts, it doesn't require that much of a tweak to a forecast.
I mean, I don't think Analysys Mason are, I mean, the trouble with the analyst community, I think, is that they want to tell a story, don't they, about a sort of exciting new technology where companies are coming along and trying to do things and willing to spend money, and therefore you're immediately kind of slightly compromised.
Yeah,
just from that development itself, it's much easier for a journalist to take a step back and go, "This is rubbish, and it's probably going to fail."
We can afford to get all purist.
Yeah,
they're trying to sell their research.
Yeah,
and there's the pure syndicated stuff, and that's fine. That's just research that you like. I used to do at Strategy Analytics, where we just track the quarterly smartphone shipments, and that's syndicated. People just pay a subscription, but a bespoke bit of research normally has some kind of parameters.
Yeah,
defining it going in,
but it's way out of kilter with what I mean. When I look at the RAN, I think the market research firm that's probably best in that area is Deloro, and they're actually used by the vendors as well who sell RAN equipment, which tells you something.
yeah.
I mean, that tells you a lot that a vendor that sells RAN equipment and accounts a massive chunk of the market uses Dell'Oro.
And they're basing their outlook on it.
Yeah, and so their forecast is that OpenRAN will account for about a tenth by the mid-2020s. It's a massive difference.
And
the numbers themselves
one was
20%.
Right. So that's a double order of magnitude.
Yeah, and also the numbers themselves are just off. I mean, the RAN spending each year, according to Dell'Oro, is somewhere between $30 and $35 billion. I mean, the figures that Analysis Mason's talking about are much, much, much higher than that. So I don't know whether they're including things that aren't really RAN spending, but it seems like they are.
It's like taxis to the airport.
Well, I mean, I did some sort of service element to it as well, and other things. And now, okay, maybe there's just a different categorization of what's RAN and what isn't, and maybe that accounts for some of it. But I still think the idea that it could possibly be a fifth. I don't want to be totally anti-Open RAN because it sounds sometimes like I am. I
think
get
self-conscious about it.
Yeah, I think that the technology has there's going to be some interest in it, and there's going to be some deployment of it. And I'm not saying it's never. I mean, it might even in the future be the way that people build networks. Who knows? You know, maybe it does eventually develop that way. I think it's be a very long and slow process. I mean, I don't think we're talking about mid-2020s for it to be a significant amount of spending. I think you're probably talking later years of the decade, even when 6G comes along. I mean, I'm not the only one who said. I think Dean Bubley, who we've had on the podcast,
lots of people
has said it's much more of a 6G thing.
Lots
probably.
of people. If we throw it at them and say, would you agree that the OpenRAN is basically 6G technology? More often than not, they'll nod.
And the report does actually mention 6G. In fairness to it, it does say that they are sort of thinking about the 6G future and where OpenRAN fits in when that comes along. But I still don't like the idea of. I just think there's a nasty wave of this recently in telecom. This sort of turning to the government, turning to the public sector and expecting them to do. So
we have it with fibre, obviously.
You have it with fibre. I think what government should do is get out of the way as much as possible. To be honest with you, make it easy. Make things smooth the way, ease planning permissions, this sort of stuff.
Well, I mean, I completely agree. I'm a sort of right of centre, laissez-faire kind of guy. So I always think government should get out of the way if at all possible.
Not backing specific technologies.
Certainly not trying to pick a winner because they're shit at it. But also, I can see a more obvious. I don't approve of it, but I can see a more obvious political angle with fibre and the whole, digitising Britain, making sure that all parts of the country can get involved in the digital economy, all that sort of thing. That's a bit more obvious. As you say, no consumer is clamouring for OpenRAN.
No.
So the political angle.
In fact, if you're a consumer who knew anything about it, you'd be saying, please don't do OpenRAN at the moment.
Right.
Because there's more that can go wrong.
Quite. So there's one other thing before we move away from Analysis Mason. I'm noticing in the press release, research director at Analysis Mason, Caroline Gabriel, who was at the BT dinner with us, lunch with us, wasn't she? She didn't hang out and get mashed after though. So you might want to work on that, Caroline. Here's a quote. Here's her canned quote within the press release. It's a bit long, but it's worth reading out because I think, her quote presumably was signed off by the people who sent the press release. So her quote presumably represents, to some extent, their perspective on it.
Yeah.
But it's been to some extent kind of laundered through the mouth of a sort of neutral third party. It says, quote, policy in the US and Japan, among other countries, already strongly backs OpenRAN. So straight away, it's a sort of geopolitical strategic framing. The US has earmarked more than $1.5 billion to fund OpenRAN, and Japan offers financial incentives and tax benefits for companies which develop, supply, and deploy related equipment. While there are some positive examples at national level, for example, Germany today, a lot of commas in this, slightly annoying me, the European Union as a whole is falling woefully short of providing the necessary, which I think is a key word, the necessary support for OpenRAN, putting at risk the future viability of a European ecosystem able to compete with other regions in the world. So Caroline Gabriel is explicitly saying that state money is necessary for this thing to work at all.
I mean, there's an assumption there that it almost sounds like this is the problem with the report. They've decided that OpenRAN is the way that things are going to go in the future, and that everything's going to be OpenRAN, and that there's no.
And if we don't step up to the
else.
plate, we're fucked.
And that's still not a given. I mean, even Analysis Mason's forecast still assumes that 80% of spending is going to be traditional RAN in 2026.
Yeah.
Now, if you start...
Did they forecast even further, presumably it goes up?
I don't know. It doesn't show it after 2026. Right. But the fact is that by the second half of the 2020s, companies are still going to be spending the vast bulk of their money on traditional RAN. Yeah. And we've got in Europe two of the biggest players that do that, which is maybe something they don't shout out about often enough in Europe, that we've got Ericsson and Nokia. And I mean, as I say, if you were a European official, I think you'd just be scratching your head and going, hang on a minute, don't we actually account for, once you get rid of Huawei, don't we account for pretty much the whole, the whole market? I mean, the whole technology, this is the other thing that there seems to be sort of willful ignorance of in the report to me. There's this sort of failure to recognise that the technology market is full of oligopolies, actually. And you look at every bit of it, and it's all about two or three big companies. And I don't understand why European operators are so worked up about this when it comes to the RAN. I mean, the public cloud is, and they're doing deals with public cloud players all the time, and you don't hear half as many complaints about them getting into bed with AWS or Microsoft or Google. That's much more worrying to me. I mean, you'd agree with me, I'm sure.
This week, I think Telenor got in bed with
I wrote about the Telenor one. Yeah. But I mean, Telenor, by the way, the company that 5 years ago said we need to invest more in AI, otherwise it's all going to be done by Google in the future. And what have they just done? The deal with Google that involves AI. I mean, those companies are very, very big and powerful, obviously. They're involved in OpenRAN themselves. They're involved in everything. I mean, it's much more...
I think maybe that's the subtext of this. Maybe they never explicitly say it, but they're saying if the telecoms world doesn't get shit together on OpenRAN, it's just going to be totally taken over by hyperscalers and all that jazz.
Well, it could, because I mean, another story I wrote this week, actually, which I mentioned in the thing I wrote this morning, was a sort of hangover from last week. I went on the Deutsche Telekom earnings call and just listened back to it because I didn't get a chance to do it on Friday. And the CEO is sounding off about hyperscalers buying buying small vendors, and even calling for the Europeans to get involved and block those kinds of deals potentially. He was obviously, it seemed to me, he didn't mention them specifically, but it seemed to me he had in mind the Metaswitch and Affirm Networks takeovers, by Microsoft, the way he was sort of saying it.
Right.
And it wouldn't be hard to see, I think it's almost surprising in a way it hasn't happened yet. Microsoft or someone else come along and buy someone like Parallel Wireless or JMA Wireless or whatever. I mean, that's already happened anyway in a way with Rakuten buying Altistar. Yeah. Rakuten is the Japanese Amazon. It's trying to build this kind of package of solutions.
I always forget that because I only think of them as this nascent mobile provider.
Yeah,
but they're a massive.
They're trying to be a sort of all-in solution. They're the systems integrator, and here's our little stack of solutions, and Altistar's part of that, and then you get this as well. You get this InOI OSS thing, and you get these other things we developed. They're trying to do a sort of full stack, if they can, to greenfield players, and they've done a deal with 1&1 Germany, where they're doing everything, I think.
Yeah.
Hardware's going to come from...
quite in bed with Telefonica, aren't they?
They're in bed with Telefonica. I mean, I don't think Telefonica's saying they're building an OpenRAN network, that Rakuten's doing it. But 1&1 has basically said, Rakuten's building our OpenRAN network.
End of.
Well, how's that any different from giving it to Ericsson or Nokia, except that it's a Japanese player rather than a European one? I just think there's a sort of willful ignorance about the way that the technology market works, and it always ends up being these big, powerful, because of the economies of scale factor, I think, it always ends up being this sort of very, very oligopolistic, from chips all the way through to the cloud.
Maybe that's some of the stuff they're skirting around. They wouldn't want to send out a press release like this saying, if we don't get our shit together, Amazon or Google's going to eat our lunch, because they don't want to antagonize Amazon and Google publicly. Yeah. So maybe they're sort of what seems like just holding out the begging bowl to the state is also maybe an indirect way of just sounding the alarm that, here's a nascent thing. Let's for once try and get ahead of the game ourselves rather than letting the massive yank companies beat us to the punch. Yeah, they could, but this is, Caroline Gabriel's quote about that one, she said the figure, I did get the figure right then, 1.5 billion from the US. Why can't they do that? What, 1.5 billion between 5 companies? Why can't they set up a fund? They themselves. Yeah. 1.5 billion is what the US has put towards OpenRAN. Okay, so why don't you do that then? Why don't those 5 operators... 300 mil in the pot. Why don't those... Exactly. Everyone chucks 300 mil in the pot. They set up a fund to support OpenRAN. Yeah? They're all interested in supporting the same players, the European ecosystem.
Just put out a report together calling out all the same companies, Amarisoft, Acceleran, all this lot. Set up a $1.5 billion fund and use that to sort of back some of these companies and make some proper commitments to it. Say we're going to build 10,000 sites with OpenRAN by whatever date, give some signals to the industry, because this is the other problem. And this is one thing that I think Vodafone was emphasising when it did announce its 2,500 site commitment. They were saying that you have to come out with firm numbers and a plan to actually, so that the suppliers themselves can plan for it. They can build it into their forecasting. They know they're getting orders coming through, and that allows them to attract funding then, and it allows them to get the support they need from the private sector. If they don't do anything, if they just go, oh well, we're interested in using it in an indoor deployment and it's not going to be ready until the mid-2020s, are they surprised that there isn't a European ecosystem? Yeah.
So I'm going to move it on, but I just want to summarise it how I see it, and you correct me if you think I've got anything wrong or you have anything you want to add. But basically, we've got a technology that there's no evidence it's better in its complete. There's no evidence that an OpenRAN RAN is better than an Ericsson or a Nokia RAN in any way.
Well, we'll come on to that on the next segment potentially,
but like BT said, it's not cheaper. It's not necessarily better, except in some particular use cases, which I think is what you're alluding to, partly there. Most of the players in it are non-European, and then we've got these 5 major European operator groups going, we've got to get better at this thing, but I don't think they've once said why. It's just taken, as you say, it's just taken as given. It's just like saying, well, the Americans are doing it, the Japanese are doing it, so we've got to do it. But we don't, because we've got Nokia and Ericsson, even if we give a shit about the geopolitical stuff, which we shouldn't really. I mean, who cares? How does it matter to me at Vodafone that I'm buying my kit off a Swedish company as opposed to an American company or a Japanese company? We're a globalised economy.
Well, this is the thing. It's almost like a pushback on globalisation.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can think is that the whole Huawei episode has freaked them out, and they've gone, oh no, we don't want foreign players. We don't want players from America or Asia anymore, because something like that might happen again. But it's a very odd. We've been used to dealing with global supply chains for decades now.
Well,
we get our oil from other bits of the world, and we.
They're trying to appeal to EU protectionism, as you said at the top of the segment.
Yeah.
So I think we totally agree on that one. So yes. So what you were just alluding to that we're going to move on to, our most read story of the week. He said, belatedly firing it up, is one where I said Ericsson sidles closer to OpenRAN. And this was a launch of a thing called Ericsson Intelligent Automation Platform.
Yeah.
Which I said in my opening paragraph, claims to deliver service management and orchestration functionalities in line with OpenRAN principles. And I basically said in a sort of mid to longish bit that this just seems like another little stage where Ericsson's done something that's a bit OpenRAN-ish without being OpenRAN. They talk about OpenRAN principles. There is, that there are. I think there's an excerpt that I extracted from the press release that seemed to cover it. Yeah, this isn't a canned quote. There was a canned quote from Jan Carlson, and he didn't explicitly mention OpenRAN, but I think he mentioned openness or something. But then, just within the press release, body press release itself, there's this quote. It says, the cloud-native solution will work across new and existing 4 and 5G radio access networks, and will support diverse vendors and RAN technologies, including purpose-built and OpenRAN. This will create greater choice for communications service providers as they evolve their networks. Ericsson's investment in this platform is reflective of the company's contributions to industry development of OpenRAN technologies. So it's a bit slippery, it's a bit oblique.
Yeah.
They keep saying, we've come up with this product and we reckon it plays really nice with OpenRAN, but it's not an OpenRAN product and it's not an endorsement of OpenRAN. Is that kind of how you understood it?
Yeah, I mean, it is OpenRAN. From my understanding and talking to analysts about it,
in so much as it can run on non-Ericsson stuff.
Well, exactly. It uses OpenRAN specifications,
right,
what they've developed, but it's a very small part of OpenRAN. Basically, it's not like what they're talking about is the service management and orchestration side of things, which is a bit of it's a bit that you need to sort of manage your RAN infrastructure. Yeah.
Right.
And in the past, this has been done with a technology called self-organizing networks, SON.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that last week as well.
Yeah, which has never really taken off. Actually, it's never been that big a deal. But the idea is that you have sort of tools that are partly based on clever software. There's some AI and ML, machine learning in there, and it allows you to do handovers, cell site handovers, or apportion traffic at a certain time of the night, or whatever it might be, or for a sports event.
Greater automation across the whole managing of the network.
It just makes the whole network sort of behave better and optimize itself without the need for lots of engineers to sort of get involved.
And it starts learning when a certain area has a certain usage pattern and adjusts itself accordingly.
Yeah, it's that kind of. I mean, that's. It's maybe not as sophisticated as I don't know. Son,
it's not self-aware yet,
but that's the idea. But it's never really sort of taken off. I mean, I think I spoke to James Crawshaw, who's an Omdia analyst, about it, and he was saying it's about $300 million a year. And you've got a few sort of specialist vendors in that market that you probably wouldn't. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't even have heard of them. People like
I'm not very good
PI
at
Works, which is Turkish, and Cellwise,
I've heard of them,
which is an Israeli company. There was a company called EdenNet that Nokia bought in 2015. And that's the reason, actually, that Nokia, the only one of the big vendors that actually has a sort of interoperable solution. So that is, a SON product that would allow you to manage, let's say you're company A and you're trying to manage radio base stations from company B. You wouldn't be able to do that with Ericsson's SON technology. It's all, and this is the OpenRAN side of things. That it's locked in. It's all about just doing its own equipment, basically.
Right.
So if you used Ericsson's SON, if you were an operator and you used Ericsson's, it's centralized SON. There's two forms of SON.
Yeah.
There's centralized SON and distributed SON. So centralized is like stuff that you would install on servers in a more kind of central location, as the name implies, and distributed SON tends to be actually included in the base stations.
Right.
And if you got Ericsson's centralized SON technology, you could only use it with Ericsson's base stations, basically, with Ericsson's equipment. You couldn't do anything with Nokia's.
Until this sort of
Whereas
thing.
Nokia has had this thing from EdenNet that allows you to do everything. So they've always been a lot more interoperable.
But isn't the point, forgive me if I've slightly sort of conflated two different things, but isn't this announcement this week?
Yeah, so RIC, with Radio Access Network Intelligent Controller, of which this Ericsson, whatever they call it, Intelligent Automation Platform, is one of those, basically. It's a RIC.
And that does play nice.
RIC is basically SON. It's just rebranded. They've just renamed it. But it's the same thing. It's SON.
So is the significance of this by itself that Ericsson SON or RIC or whatever didn't used to play nice with OpenRAN, and now it does?
OpenRAN's a new thing. It's 2018, isn't
right,
it?
So
you mean it's interoperable?
Yeah.
The point, OpenRAN's just an expression people want to use, but the point is it works with other kit.
Whereas it didn't
and to do that, it uses specifications that have been developed by the ORAN Alliance, probably by Ericsson actually, because it's in the ORAN Alliance, and most of the work it's been doing ever since it joined, it's always made clear that the main area it wants to get involved in is not all this front haul stuff where you allow your radios to work with another company's baseband equipment, which is the bigger thing, really, I think, for OpenRAN to the purists, because that's real disaggregation. Then that's the real threat to Ericsson, arguably, if that happens. The area they've always been more interested in is the automation stuff. The RIC, basically. It's a relatively small market.
As you said, about 300 million.
300 million. I mean, James was saying that with openness and with the sort of injection of innovation that could provide, and companies being quite interested in it, operators, that he could see it sort of doubling over the next few years. And it's not just it. So this is the thing. So Ericsson's got this product, and as you say, it's interoperable now, whereas it wouldn't have been in the past. And the other difference is it's real time. So SON control loops, I think, only update once every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas RIC stuff is like a few seconds at most.
Yeah. So it's properly dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, there's two forms actually. There's non-real time, which is basically the CSON. It's stuff that's on servers in a more sort of centralized location. And there's near real time, which is the equivalent of DSON, of distributed SON, which you'd actually have in the kind of probably in the base stations themselves. And Ericsson's not getting involved in the latter. So the stuff that it's doing is like a CSON equivalent. It's called non-real time, but it's a stupid label because it's actually, instead of being 15 minutes on CSON, it's more like 1 or 2 seconds.
Right.
The difference that near real time would make is like less than a second.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge difference.
It's going to be a weird sort of RAN setup where a second makes a critical.
Well, I mean, and possibly even, I don't know whether even reducing it from 15 minutes to a second is
really matters.
I mean, it sounds big, doesn't it? It's a big difference, obviously, in terms of the time. But the use cases that have been thrown out by, in fact, Neil McRae at BT last week, because this is an area that operators seem to be getting quite excited about. The RIC. This is the ones, even the ones that are not that upbeat about OpenRAN generally, are saying that the RIC could be something they could see themselves doing. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason is because it's sort of innovation. It's like a new thing. You were saying about that OpenRAN isn't necessarily any better than a traditional RAN. Well, that's the argument area where it is, because they've come up with this specification that is real time. Whereas previously, the 3GPP hadn't defined anything.
Can't Ericsson or Nokia do that by themselves within their own closed things?
Well, the 3GPP never define the specification.
But my point is that the thing I'm still trying to get my head around with anything to do with OpenRAN and why it could ever be advantageous, even if we take out the geopolitical stuff, the competitive stuff, the possible money savings, although McRae's sceptical about that, is there anything it does intrinsically better? And I know this is one of the things, but I don't understand why this is unique to OpenRAN and why Ericsson just can't create an equivalent thing within its closed system.
Because the 3GPP never defined the specification.
Right. But how come OpenRAN can do it and Ericsson can't?
Because OpenRAN has defined the specification.
I see.
I mean,
Ericsson's got to wait for the 3GPP.
There's not necessarily. It's like saying, why has the 3GPP not done an open front haul interface?
Right. Yeah, which
it could do
constantly, obviously.
It could do, but it
just hasn't, and that's what constrains people, sort of legacy players rather than OpenRAN players. Is they've got to wait for the 3GPP to get its shit together.
Well, we're talking about standards here, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's how the market works. They develop standards, and then
half the point of this is that it's outside of standards, so it's less constrained and congested.
No, it's not outside of standards because it's been done by the ORAN Alliance.
Well, it's outside of the 3GPP standard.
Okay, so it's not a standards body; it's a specifications group. But I mean,
so it's more flexible. Is what I'm getting.
Not really. It's just they've developed the specification and the 3GPP hadn't.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Right. So, but for Ericsson to be able to do it, would the 3GPP have to decide to develop a specification?
Yeah, they would.
Because otherwise, Ericsson couldn't play nice with the whole standard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything necessary to prevent the 3GPP from having done that. Why they haven't done it, I don't know. But it has now been done by... It's been done by the ORAN Alliance. Probably a lot of it's been done by Ericsson, because as I say, that's the area they've been working. That's the main area they've been involved in. And they've come up with this new specification that basically allows you to do real-time stuff. Whereas previously, the standard that you would use for SON and all that was a sort of 15-minute control loop update.
But do you see why I bang on about it? It's trying to get to, and I think this stuff's maybe a bit more obvious to you than it is to me, just trying to get to the bottom of why the OpenRAN ecosystem is able to do things that other people aren't, given that everyone's working within the same rules of physics, everyone's got the same kit available, all that sort of thing. Why does it have any intrinsic advantage? And what I'm getting from it, just to sort of active listen again, see if I've understood it right, it's just that they are able to innovate in certain ways that aren't constrained.
No. I mean, the reason the 3GPP hasn't developed open front haul specifications and stuff like that is probably because it's not in the interests of Ericsson and Nokia to have done that. Yeah,
right.
Because, I mean, that's if you're being very sceptical about why those players. If you talk to Mavenir, for instance, and John Baker, who's talked about this a lot, why is CIPRI not open? Why is it that if you use that as the interface between your radios and your baseband equipment, you have to use Ericsson on both sides of it? Why is that the case? He would say, well, because it's not in the companies, the big companies in 3GPP, who dominates the 3GPP, Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, a few others. They're the big players in the 3GPP. He would say it's not been in their interest to open it up.
Like it's a
this is the whole reason they went outside the 3GPP,
clearer to me now.
And they set up this organisation called the ORAN Alliance because there was an operator push to have to address issues like that. They wanted to break apart all these sort of semi-proprietary links that exist in the RAN and allow you to be able to mix
Yeah.
and match vendors. Now, as part of the work that's been going on there as well, they've come up with this new specification for SON, basically, which is the RIC. It's like an example of innovation. It might just be something that the 3GPP never saw as a priority in the past. As I say, it's not been a huge market, and it's not gone anywhere really. And you talked to James Crawshay, he said people have just regarded it as a bit of a hassle in the past. I mean, he's not convinced that RIC is, I don't want to say he's negative because it sounds, I'm sort of putting words into his mouth then, but when I spoke to him, he's not, his view is it could be very good in terms of spurring innovation and getting other players into the market, because one of the things it does, because it's open, it allows you to use applications from third parties. So with a SON in the past, because it's not open, you buy your SON, let's say, from Nokia, and all the stuff that you do on that SON comes from Nokia. Whereas with a RIC, you could have third-party application developers writing a sort of network management app that runs on that platform, kind of thing. It's pretty hard as someone who's not a network engineer to envisage what those could be. It's not like an Apple App Store where you've got video apps on there and games and all sorts of consumer things that are really fancy. I mean, I could only envisage 4 or 5 really to do with managing the network. But Ericsson, when I chatted to them about this announcement, earlier in the week, they were saying that there's possibly 100 use cases that some operators are talking about. But they're not things that are going to make this is where I'm negative about. They're not things that are going to make a huge difference from a consumer perspective, are they?
No.
It's more about operator management.
No, but I get
of network
from
resources.
this conversation and from us, from me sort of keeping going over it until I felt I got my head around it, and you patiently explaining it to me. I can see now the sort of philosophical underpinning of almost like a splinter standards group of going, we feel too constrained by this core standards group.
And that's why OpenRAN
We're going to
came
go
about.
off and do this thing. And so that makes sense. Again, it's very in the weeds. What no normal people should give a shit one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I get a greater sense of what the sort of philosophical underpinnings of it are. Whether it yields anything useful is another matter.
Although people like John Strand would say that it's not actually a standards group. It's not. It's a specifications group, but it's not. I mean, we're getting into semantics a little bit, but it's a fair point in a way, because I think if you look at the WTO and how it defines a standards body, it needs to sort of tick certain boxes to do with openness and accountability and all this kind of thing. And there are some issues. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, if you remember, Nokia paused work in the OpenRAN Alliance early this year.
That's right. Yeah, there was a little kerfuffle. Yeah,
so there's Chinese companies involved in the ORAN Alliance, and a couple of them are on the entity list.
That's right, and they were worried they're going to get in the
They were worried they're going to get... Now, that's the same for the 3GPP, by the way. Huawei's in the 3GPP, and yet Nokia doesn't have any concerns about working in the 3GPP. If you talk to someone like John Strand, he would say, well, yeah, but the 3GPP is recognised by the WTO as a standards body, whereas the ORAN Alliance wouldn't be.
So they're more exposed.
Because there's certain things... I mean, they've tried to address that a little bit by making things more transparent, and publishing details of what they're up to, which they didn't used to do. But there's still some things going on that are a little bit odd. For instance, the founder members, which are operators, by the way, I think it's NTT Docomo, China Mobile, Orange, Deutsche Telekom and AT&T. Those 5 founder members have got a veto, which you wouldn't get in a standards body.
Like the UN, isn't it?
You wouldn't get in a standards body.
You don't get that in 3GPP, okay.
Yeah, so, well, it's like, if you do that sort of thing, then you're sort of, one of those boxes that the WTO considers to be important isn't ticked, sort of thing, for you to be recognised as a standards body.
I mean, it gets so convoluted, doesn't it, when you've got these supranational bodies, all of which have got to get involved.
Yeah. So I mean, going back to the RIC stuff, I was just going to say that the thing about the Ericsson, I mean, you were saying it's sort of sidling. I don't know what your headline was, but something about it sidling towards.
And I think closer to.
I think that's a really good way to describe it, actually, because
I thought I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about.
Because what they can say that they're doing OpenRAN with this. But at the same time, I mean, this platform they've introduced, by the way, this intelligent automation platform, one of the things about it is it will support traditional infrastructure. So it's not like you can roll this out with these new specifications, but it's not like you have to overhaul everything. It's not like you have to rip out all the radios and all the stuff that you've got already deployed in the network. It will work with those, yeah? So they can carry on building base stations in the old closed way and sell this to an operator that just sort of lays it on top and carry on as normal. And they can say they're doing sort of OpenRAN stuff. But the big thing about OpenRAN really is coming back to that kind of disaggregation of the radio and the baseband. And once if you split apart things like that, that's a much bigger threat to Ericsson, really.
Yeah.
That's why he doesn't really want to get involved that much, I don't think, in that area, because the prospect of somebody being able to come along and say, well, we'll take Ericsson's baseband, but we're going to get our radios from K&W in South Korea, whereas previously Ericsson would have sold the whole package.
But the delicate balancing act they've got, as I think I might have said somewhere in my thing, I think my third paragraph, I said, the thing is, if your customers say they want something, you'd be pretty stupid not to at least be seen to be trying to offer it to them. So simply ignoring OpenRAN has never been a viable option, brackets for Ericsson.
Yeah.
So what they seem to be doing is they're going, look, we'll make stuff and we'll make it play nice with OpenRAN, and if you really want, you can cherry pick and you can have a bit of our stuff, a bit of someone else's stuff. But what they're presumably hoping for is that customers will end up thinking, do you know what, I can't be fucked to think about it. Ericsson, you just do the lot like you always did back in the day.
Well, and I think that's potentially one of the things that could happen with OpenRAN. Orange is saying that from 2025, everything we buy will have to be OpenRAN compliant.
But it could still all be Nokia.
But it could still all be Nokia or Ericsson. And for those companies, I don't see why it's a hard thing to open up their interfaces anyway. It's not like they wouldn't have OpenRAN products in the... I bet you I've talked to analysts about this before, and they've all said, I bet you anything that Ericsson has a team of people that is making sure they have the most advanced OpenRAN equipment that you can get there, just in case all of a sudden an operator goes, right, we're demanding that you can support this. To me, it's not like... this is why the RIC's a bit interesting in a way, because of that sort of time difference, that real time issue. It is better. Whereas OpenRAN and the traditional RAN, you're not really getting features that you can't get on the...
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's not like it's just about using different products. It's not like there's anything intrinsic about it that's different. It's not like it's a whizzier 5G service. If anything, it's not quite as good. People say. That's something
that's what's been good about this segment. It's been one of those times where you've had to sort of explain some stuff to me, or I've just admitted that I'm struggling to work out certain sort of nuances of the thing. And we got a compliment by someone who watches the pod quite regularly. I think they commented on LinkedIn or something, going, they like the way we sort of thrash something out. Yeah. And I just commented back that, sometimes just free, unedited dialogue, that's the way you get to the bottom of things. Yeah. Because you only, something that might be obvious to you isn't obvious to me, or maybe vice versa, less often. And that's how, and that forces you to explain it to me. But it's only by me going, no, I still don't get it. It's like
but it's good to be forced to sort of explain it, because sometimes then you realise you don't understand it as well as you thought you did. And, you know what I mean? And it's like you can go off and think, well, afterwards, maybe I need to.
Scott, are you trying to take me into a corner?
I'm no expert on this. A lot of my stuff I'm parroting about the RIC has just come from a chat I had with James Crawshaw this week, and
he's more expert than you. You're more expert than me. I'm more expert than most normal people.
If he listens to this, he'll probably go, Ian, you got a load of things wrong there, and someone will have to go and talk to him about it.
He's probably face palming.
He might be, but
So. I think I'll wrap that on. I was just wondering, there were a couple of... no, I'm not going to read them out. There were a couple of other comments on the Ericsson thing. Not comments, canned quotes. But I don't think they had anything more to what we've already said, so I'm just going to skip it, and we're running out of time anyway. By the way, I've got to say, that Yeti, so for the past few weeks, we've been using it with ice in it. Yeah?
It's still pretty cold, actually, without ice.
Well, this is what I was just going to lead up to.
Yeah.
We bought these tins cold. So we've started recording at about 2. We bought the tins about 1. So they've been in there for an hour beforehand out of the co-op fridge. And here we are 3, an hour later, and they're still cold coming out of that Yeti, and there's no ice in there. Yeah. So it's obviously a really good insulator. Thanks again, Danielle. Fair play to you.
It's good.
Because normally we lob ice in there. Pierre and I differ on the ice administering strategy. I put the ice in first, he puts the tins in first.
In this world.
There's ice in first and there's tins in first, and Pierre and I are opposite on that. I couldn't say for sure my way's better. That's just how I instinctively did it. Anyway,
I think you should do like a bit of both. Put a bit of ice in, put the cans in, and then put a bit more ice in.
Sort of OCD about the whole thing.
That's the way to do it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, that's what we'll do. Next time I'll put half the bag in first, then the tins, and the other half of the bag. Can't say fairer than that, can you? But yes, fair enough. They're still nice and chilled after 2 hours out of the fridge. Yeah. So another bit of free marketing for Yeti, and for that matter, Danielle, on that one. So yeah, moving on to the last thing, a slightly less involved. I think we've done 2 segments that are pretty heavy on the technical shit, haven't we?
Jesus, yeah.
So let's talk about supermarkets.
Yeah, that's easier.
Why are you talking about supermarkets, Scott? What's that got to do with telecoms? I'm so pleased you asked. Actually, I've nicked that off Jeff Norcott, who was with earlier. When he does his podcast, he does it by himself, and he quite often says something and then challenges himself on it, and sort of does a whole sort of double.
I'm going to have
thing.
to listen to his podcast now.
It's good, yeah. You enjoy it, and it's only about an hour long,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. He's quite middle of the road,
Yeah.
but funny. So there's this new sort of technology going on in supermarkets, which is called Cashierless. And basically, I don't know about you, what I've got right now when I go to Sainsbury's, I started using, they had these little scanners.
Oh, I've never done that.
No,
That
well,
looked
I
like a
only started
nightmare.
using them when...
It's good.
Yeah, I only started using them when the pandemic started, because everyone was freaking out and smearing alcohol on their hands and generally thinking if you touch anything, your hand's going to fall off, or whatever the hysteria was at the time.
It's way faster.
And so I thought, fuck it, I'll start using them, because that's the first step of Cashierless.
Yeah.
Then you
So
scan,
the idea is you pick something up and you bleed the
scan it.
barcode.
Yeah.
And then you drop it in your basket.
Just drop it in your basket, and then when you get to the end, all you got to do is say I've finished, and it knows what you got.
Yeah.
You don't have to have some person sat at the.
And how do you pay for it?
At the end, you
pay
go,
with a normal card.
you go to the self-service thing and you scan the barcode on the self-service computer.
So you
And
get a
then the
barcode generated after you've done everything.
Yeah,
And you're
QR
out.
code.
Not really. You just scan the code on the machine, and the machine knows.
It sort of
what
transfers
you
your basket onto
got. And then
the
they
machine.
ask you, did everything scan? And you say yes, and then you just pay.
Okay.
And so there was that, and then more recently it's moved on to one that's purely smartphone based, where you use your smartphone camera to scan the barcode.
Okay.
It's the same thing.
And that's in Sainsbury's.
That's in Sainsbury's. And so that's what I use now. So you basically just fire up an app, start shopping, and then complete it in the way Pierre just described.
And they do random checks sometimes.
They do random checks, yeah, but not that often.
Yeah.
But I always get paranoid. I'd never deliberately, I'm only a journalist.
Random
I know-
checks to make sure you haven't made any mistakes, basically.
Yeah, or you're not thieving,
right, yeah.
bastard. And I always feel a bit self-conscious going out, because I'd never deliberately nick something. Well, why would you, 50-year-old man, bother to go and try and nick a bit of cheddar? That'd just
Especially
be silly, wouldn't
in
it?
your local when you go every day.
Well, it
Yeah.
has happened, Scott.
No, my nicking days are behind me. That was when I was a little kid. By the way,
Who was that
Chris,
chef? Who got
Oh,
a
yeah,
funny
there was
little
some-
beard and looks a
well,
bit like a garden gnome.
Sometimes you get a celeb have a little breakdown and
Yeah,
they go
exactly.
all klepto.
It's totally. It's a
Winona
cl-
Ryder didn't.
Winona
years
Ryder's
ago,
another
didn't she?
one. Didn't Richard Madeley have an incident?
And it's not
Although
that
he
they
said
need
was
to
a
do
mistake.
it. They just go and nick a 10 quid top.
I
Just
think
for
in
the
his
thrill
case
of
it was more likely to be a mistake, wasn't it? But
I don't think any of them need to do it.
no, I think
It's just-
I think it was in his.
I think it's an actual mania, like an addiction.
Maybe.
Just as you can get addicted to sort of gambling and all sorts of other things, or other weird behaviours,
Yeah.
you can get addicted to nicking stuff. Anyway, I'm not, all right? But every now and then you worry that you just forgot to scan something.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's never happened yet. I haven't been caught yet. Although I did have one time, actually, I was shopping with my wife and we were just having a bit of banter when we were paying up and making each other laugh. And I put it through and he went, right, yeah, that'll be 100 quid or whatever. And then we were just laughing and I just pissed off without paying. And I was just putting the bags into the car and the security guard came out and went, oh, you haven't paid. And I was like, shit, I hadn't, haven't I? I went back and he started giving me dirty looks and go, you got to pay. I went, yeah, I know. If I was going to nick it, why
that's
would I go
embarrassing.
all that way?
Yeah.
Anyway. But
That's what they want you to
but I
think.
actually think it's easier to nick things than with the new system. So this cashierless stuff, it's Amazon's one that's been going on about it for years, and they basically use sensors, cameras, RFID, whatever, all kinds of stuff, so that you walk in, you just scan in. Let's say using your app,
Yep.
or there's probably a QR code reading machine on the way in. You scan in, throw a bunch of shit in your trolley, and then you scan out, and that's it. Bob's your uncle, or Robert's your father's brother, as they say in North London. Haven't you heard that before?
Me neither. No.
I think that came up in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. Robert's your father's brother.
Is Vinnie Jones in that?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was good. And and so that's why it's called cashierless, because you basically can have a shop where you just don't need any people at all.
Yeah.
And so Amazon's got this technology, and it's got its own stores that are called Amazon Smug Bastard or something like that.
Is it called Amazon Go?
Yeah, that's it. Amazon Go, not
yeah.
Smug Bastard.
Amazon Go is an own Amazon store. Where are those?
Yeah.
I've never seen one of those.
Well, they started them in the States, in Seattle. I think they might have opened one.
Jesus.
I know they were planning one on Oxford Street, but I don't think it ever happened.
You know what's going to happen now? I mean, it's all going to be Amazon Go in London and
No, I think the technology is...
Well, or maybe not, because the story I wrote this week is that Sainsbury's is using Amazon Go technology. So they've licensed...
Oh, I see, okay.
They've licensed the Amazon Go technology, and they've actually opened up a Sainsbury's in... don't know if you've been to Holborn Tube Station, but there's a Sainsbury's just over the road from it. It's in that one.
And they're using Amazon Go?
Yeah.
So basically you just chuck stuff in your basket and you've already paid for it. So
and I think those clever technologies, I mean, I linked to a website that's got all these FAQs. So obviously people are worried, like, what if they chuck something in their basket and then they change their mind?
Yeah.
Apparently it's all clever enough to know. I mean, I haven't tried it. We'd have to go to Holborn. We'd have to be investigative
do you need
reporters.
to download an app for it to work, presumably?
Yeah.
You download an app. You don't have to wear a special bodysuit or anything.
No.
It's just hard to understand how it works.
Well,
without
I was telling Scott also there's another technology that's a bit less advanced that I saw in Decathlon and Uniqlo.
Well, Decathlon has the thing that you just drop it in a box and then you take it out.
That's what I was about to say. Talk about stealing his thunder. He hardly ever gets to say anything. He was about to say one thing.
No, but he knew about it.
Made me feel bad.
It's just like you don't have to scan, you just drop it in the basket. That's quite cool.
Yeah. So but this is even more. There's no intermediary phase.
Yeah.
It's all first world problems.
Yeah.
Until recently, we didn't know that going through a cashier is such a hassle. I mean, it is. If you do a really big shop, if you do like a 200 quid shop for the whole week, and then you've still got to pass it over the conveyor belt and then bag it up at the end, that's a bit of a drag.
Do you know what though? I'm going the other way on all of this stuff. I'm actually wanting now to use cash more than I've ever done before. Because I had a horrible run-in with Microsoft this week where I realised they've been charging me for Xbox purchases and it's unclear whether they've been things that my younger son's bought or bought accidentally or not even bought, because there's no record of them on if you go into the Xbox account, they just don't come up.
Well,
so I had to ask my bank to block any payments from Microsoft now.
God's
and I've
sake.
cancelled all the. It was £400 altogether over the last few weeks.
Are you going to get it back?
Well, I mean, the bank's basically said if it ever happens again, then we'll refund you, but you'd have to sort of sort it out with a vendor. What's going? I'm going to dig into it, but I was looking at my bank.
With Microsoft.
I don't know about you, but I don't always check my account every day, and sometimes you just look at it after like a week, and you go, "Why has it gone down so much?" I can't understand. I've had a couple of bills, and I just feel that this whole. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that this whole digital, everything's on direct debit. A lot of things are coming out your account all the time. I just feel like I've lost track of spending.
It's become so easy to spend money.
I feel like if you were a hacker and you could charge like 10 million people £1, no one would notice.
Be like Superman 3, isn't it?
Yeah.
When Richard Pryor gets all that wedge from the spare bits of money.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Show my age.
I thought Richard Pryor.
Isn't that the one where
they
make a diamond at the end by crushing a lump of coal, and he flies off and gives it to Lois Lane or something?
Where it's got Kneel Before Zod.
Must have been a big lump of coal.
Yeah, Kneel Before Zod.
Kneel Before Zod
Terrence
is
Stamp.
Superman 2. Yeah.
Terrence Stamp was
Superman 3 is the quirky one with Richard Pryor in it.
Yeah.
I don't know where they went after that. Maybe Superman 4.
Christopher Reeve wasn't.
Superman 4 is the one where he fights the Russian. No,
I've never seen Superman 4.
Anyway,
what's his name? The Russian guy?
The actor?
No, the character.
The character Ivan Drago.
Drago, there you go.
Yeah.
There's a new one coming out.
Well, I want to know.
Me. Yeah, Rocky versus Drago. I think it's a remaster or something.
I want to see Clubber Lang versus Drago. I want to see Mr. T versus Dolph Lundgren.
Hang on, a new Rocky film with Sylvester Stallone.
I think it's a remaster. Must be.
I know, Sylvester Stallone, bless him. I mean, he's in great shape, but he's about 400 years old.
Yeah, or it's like the Sons, something like that. I don't know.
Son of Rocky.
Yeah. Rocket.
Son of Drago.
Rocket.
Rocky Jr.
Yeah. Anyway, we digress.
Just a bit.
So just a tiny bit.
Hey, back to Amazon.
So that's the thing. So Sainsbury's can get involved in that. And it just so happens that last month, Tesco opened a store also on Holborn. Not Holborn Circus, but just down the road.
Also using Amazon Go?
No, they're using Trigo. So this is
I've heard of them.
a specialist technology called Trigo. But it looks like the MO is very similar, like some combination of sensors where the product is, cameras to follow you around like goddamn Terminator.
Yeah.
Perhaps RFID, I'm not sure. But they seem to think it's rock solid, such that you will only ever... And then you walk out and then you get billed. And, to your point about it being so easy to spend money...
It's not just easy to spend money. It's like you lose sight of what's happening with your money, actually, as well.
Well, I agree, and that's not good.
The old days, when everything... You had very
stuff.
few things on direct debit at all back in the old days. You might just have had... your rent or your mortgage coming out, or and your car insurance, and then everything else is pretty much going to get cash out the bank and hand it over, and then I've got 50 quid out and I've got to pay this.
You would buy a DVD. Now it's
exactly. Whereas now it's like there's all these
tangible.
things coming out, and it's with the digital platforms as well: Netflix, Amazon, Disney, Spotify. I've got a string of these things. I've even got charged for storage for Google and stuff because I'm on so many gigabytes that I've used in the cloud that I end up paying £3 a month or something.
I'm just flirting. I'm about 95%.
I'm on. There's so much money. I just need to do like this audit of.
Google gets enough of my fucking money. Yes, no, you're right. And then whatever you get paid.
How is Google getting your money besides your phone?
Well, I don't hand over that much money to them, but they.
You mean from ads?
They're involved in too much of my digital life already. I think is the point I'm trying to make. That the thought of then actually handing the money over, other than buying a pixel every now and then, just sort of does my head in. But so the interesting thing is we've got in Holborn, like less than 5 minutes, probably 2 minutes walk apart, we've got two pioneering cashierless shops competing with each other, with two competing cashierless technologies. So that's quite interesting. One day we should do a bit of investigative journalism, go down, do a bit of shopping in Tesco, a bit of shopping in Sainsbury's, and then write it up.
Yeah.
It'd probably be shit, though. They'd be like, they both didn't... They both just let us walk out, and then they billed us after. That wouldn't be a very long story.
We can find a few anecdotes to throw in there that would be amusing.
Yeah.
So, indeed. Scott, so you tried to nick something. It didn't work. I'm going to steal
But that's
razor
my point.
blades.
I think it'd be easy to nick something now. I mean, if it didn't get searched, because even when they search it, they do. It's not like they rescan everything you got. They rescan one or two things. So it'd probably be quite easy if I was tempted to nick a bit of cheddar, or or a 4-pack of.
Rather have a bit of Gruyere, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, quite. No, they're more likely to scan Gruyere. That's a known thing.
That's expensive.
They look out for that. That's like a barometer. Thing, and they're like, oh, he's got Gruyere.
That's a red flag to your guy who checks things.
It's a known stat that thieves are into Gruyere. But I think it'd be easier to nick something now and just smuggle it through than it would be with that thing, which is just tracking you the whole time. Flip side is then you've got this greater degree of surveillance and all that sort of thing. And I don't know what they do with the data. I don't know what Sainsbury's does with the data now. They know what I buy, obviously, because it's all done through their little Nectar program.
Yep.
I don't think they've ever successfully.
They give you vouchers.
Yeah, I know, and I didn't even take them. Like last time I went there, the vouchers, I would just always ignore them. Because I just can't be bothered to think about it and just think, oh, look, I've got a voucher, maybe I'll buy this shit I don't need.
I don't have any of those.
No, the good ones, they give you, they notice you keep buying that one thing, and they give you a voucher for that specific thing.
I probably should look at them more. Last time I just left them and bloke was going, oh, you forgot your vouchers. I was like, I don't want them, mate. And he looked at me like I was mad.
It's free money, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have any of those loyalty cards or anything.
Yeah, I got Nectar, but
which is probably really stupid because I know you save a lot of money. But
Nectar's never done anything for me. But on the flip side, apart from those vouchers, I'm not aware. People sort of freak out a little bit about data privacy and like, oh my god, they could be doing all this stuff. I'm just not aware of anything that I've ever bought as a result of some kind of algorithmic pushing of that product in my face. But maybe that's just because I'm old and set in my ways.
Well, I don't buy anything for myself anyway.
Yeah, except for beers.
I mean, that's what happens when you get middle aged, isn't it? Yeah.
I know, the one thing that they could be throwing at me is alternative beers.
Yeah, or single malts that cost about 20 quid, as we were chatting about earlier.
Right. Well,
Sainsbury's always has an offer every week for a single malt that's about like £21, £22, and it's often a good one like Glenlivet or something, but. This has zero to do with Telecoms.
They're still not stocking
Eagle Rare.
It has to do with supermarkets. Eagle Rare is
that's still only a Waitrose thing, I think, among supermarkets.
Yeah,
in the UK.
It used to be it's 37 and you would discount it to 32, but now it's to 30. Now it's 32.
Right, still a fiver.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's that. I mean, the real reason I would bring it up is because I thought it'd just be fun to chat about this sort of this sort of future technology. And maybe that's the way it'll always be. And there's a part of me that doesn't regret it, because it does eradicate that minor first world problem of having to go through that final little hold up. Obviously, being able to go in, you know, I mean,
personally, I never really have to deal with queues. I rarely
because you
queue.
do that that
yeah,
thing.
and it's very rare. I mean, because I never go on weekends. Maybe that helps.
I mean, I'm still at the stage of going through the automated scan it on the machine, and then, and
That's
which
what I
I find quite easy to use now. The only issue
Yeah.
if I get there is if you put beer through and there's some guy has to come over, and
That's
and occasionally it doesn't show something up.
And
that you
maybe,
put down.
do you know what? I haven't covered that in my coverage of this.
Oh yeah.
How does that work? So, like, when we go to Co-op to get our 4-pack of Punk,
Yeah.
if we self-scan, then it goes, oh, watch out, this might be a kid trying
Yeah.
to turn into an alcoholic. And then the bloke, and they're normally so understaffed, the bloke's probably off stacking up the dog food somewhere. He's got to come back, press the button, says, no, this is definitely an old bloke.
I would think
he's
that
good to
the
go.
app
Yeah.
doesn't let you do this if you're under 18. You
Yeah, it
I
could
mean,
be.
you shouldn't
Oh,
shop.
that's true, because it'll be
Yeah.
sort of...
It'll be age
So
linked.
you're pre-ID'd, aren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust a 12-year-old just shopping and in a non-cashier
You can't
place.
just send your kids
Yeah.
out.
I don't know.
You're just sitting there in your boxers watching the football, going, oh, go and get me a 4-pack, really? I can't be bothered to move.
My,
I do
my
that quite a
violin
lot.
teacher used to send me
not
for
for a
cigarettes.
4-pack, but I send Alex down the road. He's
stuff.
11 for stuff that we need. If I'm
God,
cooking
I
and I've
remember-
forgotten something, like, can you nip down the road
No,
and get this?
I'm
when I
pretty
was
sure-
10 years old, my violin teacher used to send me go buy cigarettes, and he
Yeah.
would write a note so that.
I'm pretty sure
Well,
my
then
mum
bring-
did.
bring
I'm
your
pretty sure
violin
my
in.
mum did
Look-
when I was a kid. She sent me down the
No,
road
I don't remember anything.
for 20 B&H or whatever. Oh my God, that takes me back. I could never stand B&H. They were rough as fuck.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah,
I was a Marlboro man when I smoked.
Marlboro Light.
Yeah, Marlboro. No, when I was at university, I was Marlboro Red. I was hardcore. I didn't fuck around. And then my big concession in my sort of mid-20s to health, I went, I'll tell you what, my body's tempo, I'll switch to Marley Lights. Can't say fairer than that. Right, okay, I think we're running out of time, and we've sort of done that one, haven't we?
Yeah.
So I'll wrap it up. God, I tell you what, my arse is falling asleep, and I'm getting backaches. I've been
Surprised you've
sat in this chair all
room
day.
too long. Yeah.
So I will wrap it up there. So thanks a lot for watching, and make sure you join us for the next one.